Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. I'm your host, Rick the Barkeep, bringing you podcast 106 here at the Tavern, presented by Hirotaku.com. Well, I think I've held off talking about the new Power Rangers movie for long enough. We had an announcement back in May. There's been very little information since then, but with what Jason Frank has said today about his involvement with the project, I think it's time that I talk a little bit about it. Because, everybody's speculating. There's a lot of hype going into this. There's a lot of concern. There's a lot of doubt. And for some people who supposedly know movies and know franchises, there's a lot of going around it. And I'll talk about that here in a bit. But there is some information that we know about the next Power Rangers movie, the third film. Don't let the Trivia Pursuit game tell you otherwise. There are only 2 films, and this will be the third. But I want to go over some of the information that we have, kind of talk about the pros and cons of what's coming up, and then just kind of give you guys what I'm expecting from the film, and again, just my expectations and my hopes and where I would like to see this film go. A new franchise for films, and of course its relation to the television series, if any. So let's go over the things that we do know. First, from today, Monday, January the 19th, Jason Frank has stated that he is involved in the project and that the film will be filming this upcoming year. Now, the release date is July 22nd, 2016, so I'm hoping that they're starting to film here soon. I also hope they have a finished script for the film and that it's really good. But Jason Frank says he's going to be involved. He didn't really elaborate as to what his involvement's going to be. This could be a number of things, from a leading role, a supporting role, to a cameo. And we'll talk about what we know, if anything, of the story here in a second. We do know that Robert Orci was attached to the project as an executive producer. Now, he has since left to go work on Star Trek 13. And yes, it is Star Trek 13, not Star Trek 3. There were 12 films before this one, so I just need to clarify that for you non-Trekkies out there. And for all of you on Facebook and Twitter, they're calling it Star Trek 3, because that is not the case. Anyway, Roberto Orci was executive producer. He dropped off, and I'm going to say thank God for that, because if that name doesn't sound familiar, here is a short list of films that he was executive producer on: Transformers, all of them; Star Trek, at least the first 2, or excuse me, the 11th and 12th one; and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I hope you can see why I'm glad that he is not going to be involved in the Power Rangers movie. Because you know what? I hated every Transformers movie. I didn't even bother seeing Age of Extinction. And the only good thing to come out of those films was in Dark of the Moon, where there was foreshadowing with Leonard Nimoy. That is the only good thing about those films, is that one scene that was foreshadowing Leonard Nimoy, and of course Leonard Nimoy doing his famous Needs of the Mini quote in Dark of the Moon. If you haven't seen it, I would go watch it. It will make you laugh. That is the only good thing that's come out of those 4 films. Star Trek's 11 and 12, or Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness, completely missed the mark. As a Trekkie, I feel almost insulted. I just did not like them. They didn't get the source material, and there are so many problems within those films. And Amazing Spider-Man 2, the best I can say about that is meh. It wasn't a spectacular film. So the fact that Roberto Orci has left the project gives me hope, because to have that guy in those 3 franchises, and basically Transformers is not getting any better. It's just as bad as it ever was. The new Star Trek films don't seem to be getting any better. I mean, Into Darkness was not as good as the first one, but the first one was nowhere as good as the Nemesis, in my opinion. And Amazing Spider-Man 2, I mean, they basically killed the franchise now to where, yeah, there may be a Sinister Six movie, but in order to get Spider-Man into Civil War and the Infinity War, they have to reboot him for a 3rd time for the films. So his involvement in these films has not been positive in any way, yet he still gets work. And I'm afraid that if he was still involved in the project, then the Power Rangers would end up as, a Hasbro-like franchise movie that gets worse with each film, but dumb Americans still go out and buy tickets to it, and it has no substance, has no heart to it. So I've gone off my rant on Orsi, but again, I'm glad he's gone. I don't know who the executive producer of the new film is going to go ahead and be, so he can only be an improvement. As long as it's not Michael Bay, for the love of God, please, no Michael Bay. Keep him as far away from Power Rangers as possible. Please. All right. We also know that Lionsgate is going to be producing this film. And you know what? That's actually not as bad as a lot of people may think. I have a short list of films I'm going to use kind of as an example here to kind of elaborate why that's not so bad. The Hunger Games films, Cabin in the Woods, the Expendables franchise, and Ender's Game. Now, say what you want about those films, Hunger Games particularly being a ripoff for Battle Royale, and of course, that just screws over the Japanese once again, but what else doesn't? These films may not be impressive story-wise or character-wise, or definitely not acting-wise in a couple of cases, but I think you have to admit that these films have great action sequences, good choreography. Expendables, particularly, I've seen a lot of practical effects in those films. Ender's Game had great special effects, and Harrison Ford, although I doubt Harrison Ford's going to be in this movie. But the fact is, the thing about Lionsgate that gives me optimism is they've done action movies, and they've done them well. The thing about, and let's go back to Transformers real quick. The problem with Transformers and the new Star Trek films and everything is that things move too fast, that you don't get to sit and linger on a shot and actually appreciate what's on screen. That's the biggest problem I have with Transformers. Everything is so fast-paced and quick, you don't get a chance to soak up what you're seeing, and your brain can't make sense of what's going on. I'm bad with people's names, but I thought I could tell robots apart in those films, but I just couldn't. It was just bad. But again, the point of this is they know what they're doing with production and with action. So for us to hear that, that's pretty good. Would I like to hear that, maybe Legendary's doing it, who's done, better action films? Oh, absolutely. But I think starting out with Lionsgate is not going to be that bad for Power Rangers. So at the very least, I think we're going to get some good action. And action, is probably a third of, what we expect from Power Rangers, or maybe half, or at least I expect more than just action. Which actually, when we get to the writers here, which is the only other thing we do know, I'm actually infused with a lot of optimism because of this writing team. Our writing team is comprised of Ashley Miller and Zach Stentz. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And just point out, Ashley Miller is actually a guy. I thought it was a woman that was writing it. No, it's a guy. I didn't know guys could be named Ashley. So, fact of the day. But between these two men, I've highlighted a couple of interesting writing credits that they have that they've actually kind of worked on together. I'll have to double check that, but amongst the two of them, here are some highlights. Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda, Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, X-Men First Class, and Thor. Now, all those, Andromeda, especially, I've heard great writing. I've seen a few episodes. I don't know which ones they've worked on, but it was a decent franchise, had some good writing. Sarah Connor Chronicles, I've only heard good things about the writing within that show. X-Men First Class, that's one of my top 3 X-Men films. And the first Thor, really good as far as a film to establish character. And the thing is, I'm really surprised we actually got these guys. We didn't get a writer from the show. We didn't get somebody who's inexperienced in writing films. We actually got people who are writers. They know how to construct stories. They know how to develop characters. Looking at Thor, one of the better highlights of the first Thor film is that Thor changes as a character. He is completely different from where we see him at the beginning of the film. He's arrogant, he's chauvinistic, he is full of himself, and he puts himself and his friends in danger over petty things, over his ego. But by the end of the film, he's matured. He realizes that he's got to do things for himself. He can't involve other people. And that's the Thor that we know that goes into Avengers, continues into the other films, which they did not write, of course, but they started it there. And the fact that they were able to take a character like Thor and develop him into this likable personality to where Joss Whedon and the others had to pick him up. Because that's the thing. They wrote the character of Thor in this film, and then Joss Whedon had to take what they wrote and go with it in the next film. Because Joss Whedon, he didn't actually create a new Thor. He took what these guys had made and put it into the film. And the same thing with Loki, is that they took the character of Loki and developed him even further into the film. And even with X-Men First Class, you know, for all the issues I think that film had, it was definitely a breath of fresh air and well-written characters, and Magneto's character in the film was definitely well done. I really appreciated that. So what gives me real hope is look at those two films and the villains that they wrote in them. Look at the characters of Magneto and Thor. They just did an excellent job. I mean, everybody's talking about how awesome Loki is. Magneto is one of my favorite, film villains, particularly Ian McKellen. But Michael Fassbender did a real good job within the film. And, of course, he couldn't do a great job unless there was something good there to write. I mean, they really wrote Magneto as not only sympathetic, but also real hard bastard, basically. So when I look at this, I'm thinking the story is going to be good. I really believe that. I believe that they're going to look at the characters, and we'll talk about this, but they're going to find the voice of each of the characters. There's probably going to be some sort of love romantic story going on. Definitely one of the Rangers is going to go ahead and change. And whoever we get as a villain, I know the villain's going to be well written. That's what I believe. That given what they did with Magneto, what they did with Loki, the villain of the film is going to be well written, whomever he or she is going to go ahead and be. So those are the things that we know about the film. There's a lot we don't know. Again, there is no director. We don't even really know what the story is because I keep hearing conflicting reports. Now, some people say that it's a reboot of the Power Rangers franchise. Other people say that it takes place within the continuity, but is also a reboot, which I don't necessarily get. It sounds to me like what they were trying to do with Star Trek and First Class, where you go back in time, you make some changes, and everything that happened before still happened, but now it's different. Which I think for Power Rangers is not the best way to go, and I'll talk about that here in a bit, but I'm not really sure. What seems to be the consensus is we're going back to the original 5 teenagers with attitude. There'll be Jason, Billy, Trini, Jason, Billy, Zach, Trini, and Kimberly. I don't know, I almost got that wrong, wow. But we're going to go back to the original 5, and if that's the case, it looks like Rhea Repulsa over again, Goldar, the Dinozords, Zordon, hopefully not as incompetent as I have shown him to be in a previous podcast. But that seems to be the direction that they're going. And if they do a reboot, I imagine since Power Rangers has already exhibited time travel, that time travel is going to play a part in it, which I hope it does not. Here's the thing. Either you need to make a Power Rangers movie that is in continuity and continues from where the story left off, or completely reboot it and start over from scratch. I don't think that you need to mix the two in there, because we've already established that there are 3 Power Ranger timelines. There's the main timeline that is all the live action shows, minus RPM. the RPM timeline, which runs parallel, and of course those two have met on a couple occasions. And then there is the movie timeline, which is from the first movie in 95. Now, if you want to add a fourth timeline, that's perfectly okay. I see no problem with that. But if you want to start mixing and saying from this point in timeline, then they go back in time and change this, see, that's the kind of stuff that bugs me. What really bugged me about the original, or excuse me, the 11th Star Trek film in relation to the original series is that there are a lot of things that just don't mesh with each other, and the films don't put that into consideration. Let me give you an example, and I'm going to say spoilers for anybody who has not seen Star Trek Into Darkness, or Space Seed, or The Wrath of Khan, because all of those actually tie into this. So again, there's a spoiler warning for you. So it turns out that in the Darkness, the villain known as John Harriman, or John Harrison, I forget, they changed his name a couple of times, is actually Khan Singh from the episode Space Seed in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Now, they justify this by saying that because of the changes in the timeline that Nero invoked in the 11th film, that it caused Starfleet to do X, then Y to happen, and Khan was, released prematurely, and that's when he started on this rampage against Section 31 and Admiral Marcus, and yada, yada, yada. But what that does not account for is the fact that Khan is white. In the continuity in Star Trek, Khan Noonien Singh is a sheik who was genetically engineered and took over the world. Now, granted, he is played by a Mexican actor in Ricardo Montalban, who was brilliant in the role. Nevertheless, you're telling me that in this alternate timeline, which is also everything we had before, but was just changed slightly because of Nero, that Khan became white. I mean, that's what the film's basically telling us, is because of Nero's involvement in the 11th film, we met Khan early, and he happens to be white. It doesn't justify it. That's a continuity error right there. Not to mention, knowing about Romulans and all that kind of stuff, and transport technology, and stuff that should not be there is there now because of what happened. And stuff that happened in the past is somehow altered by this presence. So if you're planning to do the Power Rangers, say you take from now in the timeline, and now I would assume would be relatively 2016, go back in time and change the day of the dumpster, well, there's a lot of other stuff that's been happening in Power Rangers. What about, the Samurai Ranger families that we previously established? What about, SPD going back in time? What about Time Force and all the stuff that they've been doing? I'm actually blanking on a number of time travel events here, but there's been a number of things that have happened before 1993. Not to mention, if you're going to actually reboot back to the first episode and use time travel, it's got to be a period piece, because believe it or not, the 90s is now a period. So we have to go back in time, change the events, but still mesh with the continuity, meaning that if you actually want to do this movie in that fashion, go back in time and change things, you have to watch 22 years of Power Rangers. And frankly, I don't think Miller or Stentz actually has watched 22 years of Power Rangers in writing this script. Now that tells me that maybe they're doing a spin-off of some kind that is not relation to the timeline, because if you're telling me that they've gone in there and not actually watch and pick up on it, I mean, here's the thing. When they did Wrath of Khan, which is the best Star Trek movie, and I'm bringing Star Trek into it because it's got a lot of parallels going on here. Nicholas Meyer went in and watched every episode of the original series and, of course, the motion picture. So that when he went in there, he knew the character dynamics. He knew what the story was about, and he could better craft the story that he wanted to go ahead and tell. And what was the result? The greatest Star Trek movie of all time, and arguably one of the greatest cinema villains of all time. So if you have to go diving into the continuity here of Power Rangers for some sort of time travel thing, then you need to have seen it all. And I doubt that's what they're doing. So I'm hoping that that's not what they're doing, and they're not going to half-ass this thing. But if a reboot is going to go ahead and happen, then we're going to get a new Jason, a new Trini, a new Kimberly, all that good stuff. And again, I have to assume it's a period piece. The only thing I can think would be different is if they decide to, what if you retold Day of the Dumpster in, in modern times? Which could go ahead and work, because then you can come up with a different continuity. And that continuity, you don't have to have the Samurai Rangers, you don't have to have Gosei, you don't have to have Terror Venture, you don't have to have Diabolico, you don't have to have anything from the original Power Rangers continuity. You can make stuff up. The thing about the first Power Rangers movie is that they took elements of the show, but it was so different that, yeah, that there are 6 teenagers, but was Tommy ever the evil Green Ranger? Maybe. Are Zed and Rita married? Maybe. Did they originally have Dinozords? Maybe. Did they even have Thunderzords? You don't know. They've constructed a continuity from bits and pieces of a previous one, but made it their own world. And you can honestly do that with what would be a reboot, is, take elements of Power Rangers and create something new, but don't say it's the original timeline or you've modified it, because then that's insulting for all the reasons I just rambled on about for about 10 minutes. Now, the other possibility is, instead of doing a reboot and going back to our original crew, or original cast, is that they could do a completely new Power Ranger story within the current continuity. And also think about where that fits in with the timeline of the show. We're about to start Dino Charge, and then next season we're going to have Dino Supercharge. So the film's obviously not going to be about the Dino Charge Rangers. I kind of see them keeping that separately. But consider that we did go ahead and skip Go Buster. Is this film going to be a Power Rangers Go Buster adaptation, where they can take the suits and take the Zords, which, to be honest, are a little bit more mature than what we get, which is an odd term to go ahead and use, but the whole thing about Go Buster is it was much darker and took itself a lot more serious than a lot of other Sentai. And you can go ahead and say the same about maybe this film, because the film is not going to be a farce, it's not going to be lighthearted, it's not going to be camp. It sounds to me, based on the writers that they got, is that this film is going to be 100% straight and serious. It's going to be a drama of some sort. There's going to be some sort of peril. There's going to be some sort of action piece and all that. But it's going to be played seriously. And, we could use Go Buster for that. We have a parallel event going on with the Go Buster suits, which is maybe why they skipped it, because doesn't Go Buster just scream live action adaptation more than, say the other shows? I mean, look at the first movie, for crying out loud. They didn't even use the spandex. They thought that was too much on a television show budget, which is why they developed the armor for that film. Which, by the way, I don't want to see armor in this film. Let's just leave that where it was. The spandex is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the Go Buster had these, pleather leather outfits, which could translate very well to the big screen. I mean, heck, when they did X-Men, going to the first film, they went from the spandex of the comics to the black leather of the film. So there's a little bit of a connection there. The Zords are not, they don't look like toys, I guess would be another positive, which again is an odd thing to say, but giant robots, are basically big toys anyway. And that's just speculation on my part, but I imagine what they would do is that if you're not going to do a reboot and you're going to do something different, then why not use Sentai suits that you haven't used and you skipped over, or create your own suits? Wouldn't it be amazing if this film created all new Power Rangers, but American Power Ranger series? Think about it. We have the Sentai footage, will get us to the television series and get us from year to year and toy sales, blah, 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 whatever. But we can do an American film with American ideas, American characters, and brand new suits, brand new Zords. That's a novelty. I mean, think about it. The first 2 films that we had, we took, the first film, Zero Ranger, Die Ranger, Kaku Ranger, took all those elements, put them in a blender, and put it on the big screen. And then we got Car Ranger adaptation for Turbo, and that turned out, well, it was a failure. I mean, there's really no way around it. So how about, instead of taking these elements, they're in the Sentai, mix them together, or trying to contrive a story out of cars traveling on a pirate ship and create something brand new that we've never seen before. Because one of the big issues about adapting from the Sentai is that you typically know where things are going because you've seen it before and you have certain restrictions that you're working within. But if you create brand new suits and brand new Rangers and all that kind of stuff, then you got a reason to get people into the audience and you're doing something creative for a change. Instead of trying to figure out how to get this 5 minutes of Sentai footage to work in this 22-minute episode, you're not bound by the footage. And the films are not bound by the footage, but we shouldn't bound them to Zords and costumes and things that may not go ahead and mix. Yeah, the Go Buster, I think, is ambiguous enough to where you can do certain things, but you're also limited by certain things. You can only have 5 Rangers. You have to incorporate the Buddyroids at some point. And there's no room to add new Zords because the Zord system is pretty much locked in. So there's some limitations if you use Sentai, but to not use Sentai footage, I think would just be amazing. But whatever reboot means in their mind, whether that means, again, going back to the original Power Rangers, doing something new with them and revitalizing them, or creating a brand new team of Power Rangers that no one has ever seen before, I think there is some optimism to be had. Now, hopefully I'm not eating my words in a year and a half, but I really have... I mean, the thing is that this movie has to be good. They have to pour their heart and soul into this film. Because this is going to be a franchise. If freaking Transformers can get 4 films, then why can't Power Rangers get an entire series of films? Because I think it's about time that we try to not so much go the Marvel Cinematic Universe path, but consider this. We're going to have the television show all the time, but we're going to have the movies. Why can't we have an ongoing series of adventures within the films that don't have to follow a television formula, that can do something different that you would never see within the show? And then depending on how they do it, you can always have crossovers. I mean, look at this. We have, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is a television show based on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, had Nick Fury from the films in for an episode. And then the film series, which had Agent Carter, she's got her own 7-part miniseries now. I believe the term is synergy or cross-promotion, however you want to go ahead and do it. So we could definitely take the films and the television show and, do some sort of cross-promotion. Or what if the movie is so good they decide to turn it into a parallel television show for Power Rangers? One show continuing off the Sentai and one show continuing off from the movie. There are so many possibilities here, it's just mind-boggling. And there are some people there that just don't have the imagination. I mean, as a lot of people have pointed out, Edargo being primarily the person who pointed me to this, AMC Movie Talk is very skeptical about the Power Rangers movie because they just don't think people are going to want to see it. And if people do want to see it, that they have to strip down the elements that makes Power Rangers great and turn it into something different, which is their words, not mine. But what is there not to love about Power Rangers and the potential that you have for a franchise and for a good movie? Because Power Rangers has everything. It has the action, it has great characters, it has amazing villains, and you can make these villains better. Again, these are the same guys who wrote Loki and Magneto. Don't you think that if they got their hands on Lord Zed or Scorpina or a new version of Astronema, that they could do something amazing with these characters? As long as they're given the freedom to do that, and I'm sure that they got some leadway. I don't know what kind of demands or mandates they have on this film. Those will probably become apparent when 2016 rolls around. But nevertheless, I mean, we are still within the golden age of superhero movies. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy worked. Don't ask me why. It worked. It was a great film. I enjoyed it. And look at what they're doing with Avengers. People at Lionsgate and Spawn need to look and say, they're actually writing stories that have themes and character development and heart and emotion to them. We need to do the same. That's the ultimate thing. That is what Power Rangers is lacking. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some great moments within the entire franchise itself and within the films, but they lack the heart that the Marvel films have, that the Batman films have, that any of those films have. They don't have they're not weighed down by that in a sense. A lot of people criticize Man of Steel for being too dark, but to be honest, for the subject material, I like a more, and realistic is a problematic word to go ahead and use here, but a more sense of scope of what they're in. I mean, because if you're the last son of Krypton, I think you'd be a little bit moody in that sense. So, I don't know. I want to see a serious Power Ranger film. Is that asking too much? I mean, because you can make a serious Power Rangers film and have it be successful. I mean, people will say that, look at Batman. My father, he likes Batman. But I ask him, do you like The Dark Knight? Did you like Mask of the Phantasm? He's like, I didn't like any of those. And I'm like, well, what Batman do you like? And he goes, I like Adam West. I mean, that's his favorite version of Batman. And I'm sure, there's a market for that, but I think Power Rangers has gone beyond that to where we need to have a Power Rangers film that is The Dark Knight, that is The Avengers, that is Iron Man 2. We need those films out there, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to get those films. And of course, I'm assuming the script is already written, so nothing I'm saying is probably going to factor into it, but I'm just hoping that these guys have listened to my podcast, listened to other fans, have watched the episodes, and they understand what the Power Rangers franchise is about, what the Power Rangers franchise needs, and don't mimic the other franchises like in Marvel, but understand what's making them good. And what's making the Marvel films good is not the action, is not the celebrity cameos, it is the good stories in there. I mean, Vin Diesel has like 2 lines the entire Guardians of the Galaxy, but he has such a great character that you can forgive that, right? So we need to do something similar along the lines of Power Rangers. We need to make a good story. We need to make something that's accessible to all ages, but it needs to take itself seriously. There's a lot of Power Rangers that didn't take themselves seriously. Again, RPM, I pointed out, did not always take itself seriously, but this film needs to take it seriously. Doesn't need to be bogged down as much as say Man of Steel was, and it's brooding, it's darkness. Not really. There's room for fun in there, but this needs to be the Dark Knight of Power Rangers. I mean, I'm using that analogy because that was the turning point for a lot of these films. That's what a lot of films were compared to. I mean, heck, look at Spider-Man 2. At one point, Spider-Man 2 was hailed as the greatest superhero movie of all time. Then Dark Knight came in, and it surpassed it because of its villain, because of its themes, because of its characters, because of its serious nature. Because for as much as you want to talk about Spider-Man films, Spider-Man 2 was a pretty lighthearted film for the most part. Yeah, it had its dark moments, but it wasn't on the same level as, say, The Dark Knight. And that's what we need to do, is that we need to take Power Rangers and make this The Dark Knight. I want to hear people say on July 22nd, 2016, that this Power Rangers movie is the greatest superhero movie of all time. I want it to be better than The Dark Knight, better than Watchmen, better than Spider-Man 2, better than The Avengers. Maybe it won't break the box office, but I want people to come out of that film not talking about the explosions, but talking about the story. And I don't think that's unreasonable. So I think I've kind of rambled on and talked a little too much on this topic. Again, there isn't much to know, but I just wanted to give you guys my expectations. And that's what I hope. I hope this will be the best Power Ranger movie and that they do something with it. So let's see what happens. I'm very curious to know what you guys think about the film and what are y'all's opinions. Do you think they're going to take it serious? Do you think it's going to be camp? Is it going to be great? Is it going to be bad? I mean, whatever. I just want to hear in the comments what you guys think. But I want to thank you for once again listening to my ramblings. But unfortunately, the tavern is now closed.